Hello, everyone. I'm Leah Hines, Executive Director of the Charleston Hub, and welcome all of you to our afternoon plenary session, Values and Issues That Unite Us, the imperative for publishers, libraries, and research institutions to join forces. We're joined today by Dr. Caroline Sutton, CEO of STM. Unfortunately, Caroline was unable to join us in person in Charleston, but we are thrilled that she is here to present virtually, and we thank her for taking the time to do so. Prior to joining STM, Caroline previously served as the Director of Open Research for Taylor and Francis. She co-founded Co-Action Publishing, was one of the founders and the first president of OASPA, and served on the board between 2008 and 2021. She currently serves on the board of directors of Dryad, the advisory board of SESTA, and is Director with Infrastructure Services for Open Access, the managing organization of the Directory of Open Access Journals, DOAJ. Previous community engagement included serving on the Open Air Advisory Board, Spark Europe Board, and the Lund University Library Board. Thank you so much, Caroline, for being here today. We appreciate you taking the time to do your presentation.
Thank you, Leah, and thank you to the Charleston organizers for the opportunity to join this virtual segment of the conference when I was unable to join in person as planned. But I am really pleased to be well enough now to record my talk and to join you online from my home in Norway. Believe it or not, originally from California, but I'm joining you today from Norway, where I've been living for about 30 years. As Leah mentioned, I am CEO of STM. I joined STM, the Publishers Association, in February of this year. And I've said it before, but I'm going to say it again. What really excites me about this role is the opportunity to not only work on behalf of a single organization, but actually to work on behalf of all of the publishing industry and all those who work in the publishing industry to advance trusted research. The only way I can work on behalf of the industry to advance trusted research is through engaging and connecting with other stakeholders. And this is why I really appreciate this opportunity to join the Charleston Conference, because this is a conference that I know brings together librarians and publishers and many other stakeholders connected to scholarly communications to engage in conversations that move scholarly communications forward. And this coming together is more important than ever before. As is repeated time and again in talks around scholarly communications, we are facing unprecedented opportunities in the form of technology and groundbreaking knowledge and methods. But we're also facing unprecedented global and local challenges that are not just about improving the human condition, but are about the very survival of our planet and humanity. This is the time to lean in to identify the ways we can best take advantage of human ingenuity, technological advancements, and creativity, whilst being mindful of the potential for unintended consequences. But there are some things that are standing in our way, and I want to address a couple of these before turning to some propositions for how we can move past them. Because if we don't call these things out, they will continue to stand in our way. So I don't mean to be negative, but I'm going to start with some of the negative, but I promise I'm going to turn to the positive very shortly. So thing one I want to talk about is the polarization of discourse. Charleston is held in the United States, and as I record this, votes are still being counted for the American midterm election. Americans and those residing outside the United States are well aware of the extreme polarization of public and political discourse today. And this isn't an American phenomenon alone. We've seen the rise of extreme positions in many other geographic locations. And those positions are amplified and promulgated through social media and other fora, drowning out the voices who represent any middle ground. In the polarized world, ideology expressed through short sound bites becomes currency rather than facts. And this is creating a world of black and white, of us and them, of with me or against me, and so on. The world we live in is so complex on so many levels, yet it is increasingly presented as if there can only ever be one truth, mine or yours. I assume that many of you recognize this as I speak of the political discourse in some geographies. And I'm sure you've also seen how this mindset has spilled over into other areas of life. And perhaps like me, you too are beginning to feel quite weary of it and are looking for ways to come together again. I'm addressing this issue today because this mindset has also spilled over into the public discourse on scholarly communications. Our space has become both politicized and polarized, unfortunately. And I'd argue that we need to be honest about this. We need to call it out. We need to be willing to say it. And we really need to recognize that we have to work to change it. And again, I know I'm not the only one to have observed this. Since taking on the role as CEO for STM, I've had many conversations with other stakeholders, funders, librarians, other service providers. And I've heard many people share with me that they too are looking for opportunities now to come together and to work together because they too have become rather weary of what looks to be, if you just look at the public discourse, of a very polarized area. But as I'll come back to, the truth of it is, we truly aren't so polarized and in disagreement as one might guess if you only looked at a Twitter feed. The second hurdle I want to address is open access as the center of our discourse. Perhaps some people were expecting or hoping that what I would address in this talk was STM's position on open access. And I'm happy to do that at some point. And I will touch on some open access and open research points a little bit later on. However, I made a conscious decision not to make this talk about open access or open research solely. Let me be very clear, though. This is not because these are not important topics to address. A few double negatives in there, but please forgive me. Indeed, these are very important things to talk about. And I sincerely do want to engage with different stakeholder communities on how we achieve a scholarly communications ecosystem that is open and trusted and reliable at scale. It's what I've dedicated most of my career to, in fact. However, open access can crowd out other things. And because it's the topic around which there is this perception that there is polarization here in Europe from where I'm addressing you and in the United States where the conference was held live. That polarization has the potential to get in the way of us having other conversations that are absolutely critical and around which we do have a shared interest. Because we have some important challenges ahead of us. And my fear is that if we let OA take all of our attention, and if we let those perceptions that we disagree about things become reality, we will find it impossible to work together. And we will be negligent in addressing some crucial topics that are critical regardless of publishing model. Recently, we held our STM annual conference at the Frankfurt Book Fair. And one of the most important themes that emerged through that conference was around collaboration. And this was expressed in a couple of ways. So first, in the past, publishers thought of themselves as competing on more or less everything. But that's no longer the case. There's a recognition today that we need to rethink this. That there is, in the words of Chris Graff at Springer Nature, who was talking about our STM Integrity Hub, some things are done better together. And we can, in fact, serve the research community and even do better for ourselves if we collaborate on some things that we previously thought were points of competition. For example, no one sees it as a competitive advantage to be the best publisher at stopping paper mills. Rather, these can only be stopped if we come together to address the problem together. But collaboration isn't just about collaboration between publishers. At our STM conference, our keynote speaker was Sir Peter Gluckman, who is the president of the International Science Council. Sir Peter has a long list of accolades, and he's a very thoughtful and very direct person. His address focused on the need for the publishing industry and what he called the research industry to have a frank conversation about a number of things. Because as he put it, researchers need publishers and publishers need researchers. And there are some elements on both of our sides that we need to be honest about, because we are contributing to problems rather than solving solutions. And we need to recognize those so we can come together and address a list of 10 items that he put forward. Because things aren't perfect. And again, there is a need and a great deal of work for us to do. And this work can only move forward if we come together and resolve to be open and honest about what's working and what needs to be rethought. I was inspired by Sir Peter Gluckman's perspective, which is aligned with the message I was looking to put forth here, namely that there are values and issues that unite us. And it is imperative that we come together around these in the interest of scholars and scholarship, scientists and science. So where are the common spaces? Where can we meet and build out from? I'd like to begin with what motivates us to do the jobs we do. I think that's a good starting point, just to bring us all together. I would venture to state that we get up in the morning motivated to do our jobs by the knowledge that what we do matters. We are engaged in a space that is dedicated to bettering the human condition, whether that be through identifying a missing link in history, advancing medical treatment, or developing methods to build stronger bridges. Publishers and librarians are a part of the framework that advances knowledge to better society. We are all typically passionate about science, about scholarship, about art, about academic freedom, and we are typically curious about what can be achieved as science and knowledge evolve. Publishers would not have jobs if it were not for research. And equally, researchers could not do their job without the work we do. The same could be said for academic librarians. You would not have jobs without research and learning, but equally, researchers could not do their job without you. And so it is absolutely imperative to come together, to collaborate, to figure out what we could do together that would make a true difference for researchers to have impact. And with this in mind, I'd like to put forward that the most important area around which we can come together is trust in science. And here I would like to quote Sir Peter Gluckman, whom I just referred to, from his talk at the STM conference. So I'm going to quote him here. He said, "The world needs science more than ever before. We must work much harder to ensure greater trust, not more cynicism about the role of science. There's not one aspect of the human or planetary condition that does not depend on science. Climate change, conflict, mental health, environmental degradation, and one could go on." End quote. I just couldn't say it better than Sir Peter Gluckman, so I thank him for that quote. As we know, trust in science and in scholarship, in scholars, in scientists is eroding. We saw this clearly during the pandemic, and it's eroding precisely at the moment when it's needed most. Misinformation, disinformation, whatever you want to call it, travels further and faster than facts. And I know that librarians and publishers share a deep concern about building trust in science and researchers, and in research. Researchers need us to work with them and on behalf of them to build trust in science and scholarship. Let me share with you some evidence of this distrust. Economist Impact, a think tank, released a report this month on research they carried out with support from Elsevier. The research was focused on how the pandemic had affected the practice of undertaking and communicating research. And the resulting report is called Confidence in Research, Researchers in the Spotlight, if you'd like to look it up. And I do encourage you to do so. It's fresh off the presses pretty much. Economist Impact surveyed thousands of researchers and held global roundtables in different regions with a wide array of stakeholders. I personally had the opportunity to participate in the session in London. I found the information to be interesting. Some of it was encouraging, and other results were rather disturbing, even if they confirmed what I supposed the case might be. There are a number of key findings in the research that are reported on, and I urge, again, everyone to read the report. I know you will be fascinated by it, but I wanted to share a few of the findings here as they relate to trust in science, because they make it very clear that we have a problem. So the background for this research is that one of the things that happened during the pandemic was that science was on center stage and very visible to the public. And this involved, for many researchers, a much more public-facing role. And they needed to engage with policymakers, with the media, and the public in a more pressing way than ever before. And the survey results, so one of the first findings is that the survey results point to this more public-facing role having presented itself with some trade-offs for researchers. On the one hand, there were opportunities for public involvement, policy influence, and influencing and improving social outcomes, essentially achieving impact, which of course is really important for most researchers. But at the same time, they're coming up against oversimplification and the politicization of research. A second finding related to this was around misinformation. Misinformation was cited as a growing concern, and over 2/3 of survey respondents said that the pandemic increased the importance of separating good quality research from misinformation. And I can appreciate that this report provides some practical suggestions for addressing some of this. And finally, I'd like to share with you some of the disturbing findings. 1/3 of respondents reported that they or a close colleague have experienced abusive or acrimonious communications when engaging online or on social media to report their research, according to Impact Economist. And according to Impact Economist, these concerns stem from a combination of the misuse, misinterpretation, and miscommunication of research, and in particular, the research process. And as I read the report, how I understand this is that we who work close to research or are researchers understand the research process. We know that knowledge can take 2 steps forward and then 1 step back as new data and new knowledge and information challenges what we've previously concluded. We're used to this, we understand this. But in the midst of a pandemic, what the media and public were looking for was clear and decisive facts. And so there is a gap between how we who are close to research or conducting research understand and experience and accept the research process and the understanding that media and the public have of that process. Since this is a US-based conference, I'd also like to read a bit of the report that spoke to the US situation. I just thought that you might find this interesting because there were some slight differences globally that are reported on here. So I'm just going to quote the Economist Impact Report. They say researchers we surveyed in the US are more likely to recognize this as a concern. Here, over 4 in 10 researchers, 42%, report experiencing or witnessing these abusive communications online, while nearly a third cite it as a top challenge, end quote. That worries me. And to quote the report further, a quarter of respondents, 24%, highlight the increased risk of bullying and or harassment as one of the main challenges of increased public attention on research. The report rightly acknowledges that, quote, if researchers are to engage more frequently in discussions about the research online, they need to feel safe and equipped to navigate online environments. Pausing to let that sink in because I'm having to let it sink in again for myself. Because at a time when we need science and scholarship more than ever before, many researchers do not feel safe or equipped to share their research publicly. We cannot leave researchers alone with this problem. So let's turn to the positive. Let's start a list. How might we come together to further trust in science and scholarship? Here, I'm just going to put out 5 initial suggestions, and these aren't necessarily groundbreaking. Please consider them as a start. In many ways, the easy starting points, because there are some other points that are going to be a bit more difficult to challenge. But we've got to get used to coming together and seeing that we can achieve things together to then go on and tackle the deeper issues. So again, this isn't an exhaustive list. It's just a beginning. After all, I only have about 30 minutes with you, and I've probably used up a lot of that time already. Let me also say, before I go into this list, that I recognize and know that some of you publishers out there and librarians are already working together on some of the things I'm going to mention. There's an industry level with the publishing industry and its representative bodies, and the library industry and its representatives. And then we have individuals working within individual organizations in those spheres who are engaged with one another, as well as individuals on and in these different organizations that are working together. So I know there is already collaboration going on, organization to organization and on a micro level. And perhaps some of what we need to do is to make that work more widely known at the next level and think about how we can actually make this an even bigger project with purpose. So moving to the list. Let's start with communication of research, since that was the last point that I was addressing above. The Economist Impact Report notes that some researchers are calling for universities, funders, and publishers to formalize communication training, starting from the PhD level, to give researchers the tools and guidance to communicate their findings ethically and effectively. And that's certainly one of the things that I heard coming out of the roundtable that I participated in. So how might publishers and librarians work together to support researchers in communicating their research? Many of STM's members provide both training and information to researchers on this, because many of my members recognize that it's not just getting that article to the finish line, but really working with researchers and their institutions to think about how do we amplify that research after its publication so that it gets into the right hands. And I'm equally certain that institutions, and perhaps through the library, are also providing similar training and support. However, the Economist Impact Report suggests that this is not enough. So how might we step up efforts to support science communication and ensure the safety of researchers? I'm going to admit to you that I don't have the answers to that question, but I would suggest and state strongly that we cannot ignore this situation. And I am quite certain that by coming together with a purpose in mind to do just this, address this issue, that we could identify potential collective actions between our two industries. So let me go on to a second point where I think we could collaborate and cooperate. Something I hear often, and something that was suggested by the Economist Impact Report, is that we need to stamp out predatory publishers. And I would add predatory conferences, because a chain is only as strong as its weakest link. We all know this. And any single predatory journal poses a risk to the trust in the overall scholarly communication system. Serious publishers are absolutely aware of the risk that predatory publishers pose to the overall confidence the research community and others have in research publications and research, and we are concerned about this. But equally, I have heard from many institutions and even research councils internationally that have turned turned to STM and asked, how might we support them in communicating with researchers about how they can identify serious journals. STM publishers appreciate the work of DOAJ, and I often point to the DOAJ when I'm talking with these groups as a place that one can send researchers. The DOAJ reviews OA journals according to an extensive list of criteria to identify those journals that meet the standards we expect serious publishers to apply. Effectively, DOAJ creates a white list that we can refer researchers to when they're looking to evaluate a journal as a source of information or as a publication venue. Related to this work, the Think, Check, Submit campaign is still active and alive. And only recently I spoke with a university association in Asia who is concerned about predatory publishers. And STM has facilitated a webinar that will be held later this month with the Think, Check, Submit team. I'm also aware, and publishers are also aware, that libraries are often that first line of support for researchers looking for a quality publication to submit to. And I do recognize that it's not always easy to discern the serious from the fraudulent. For example, are special issues a problem or are they not? How many special issues would indicate that there could be a problem here? Why might a journal have a lot of invited papers? And when is peer review too fast and indicate a problem? I believe we as publishers can be more helpful to you by sharing information on how publishers are innovating around workflows and peer review to achieve, for example, faster times to first decision and publication. We can also be sharing more information about how we build and develop journals so that you can understand how we operate. I think this information can make it easier for you to judge publications and to support researchers as they navigate this landscape. Because let's face it, there are a lot of journals today and there are new journals coming every day. Equally, transparency is important in relation to retractions, including when these are due to the inappropriate conduct of an editor or reviewers. And here publishers could share more information on how we investigate potential breaches of research integrity. I would argue that this could build trust by demonstrating how seriously we take research integrity. Because I think we would all agree that it is important that publishers do announce retractions, even if announcements give rise to critique, which they quite often do, especially when a publisher needs to retract a large number of articles at one time. But trust in science and in publications necessitates that publishers are forthcoming when the current checks and balances have failed, and are open about how they are taking steps to prevent such failures to occur in the future. I believe that sharing this information and being forthcoming about this and doing a better job of communicating this information information with library professionals could also help to build your trust in science. And in turn, you can share this with researchers. The third point I'd like to raise is supporting researchers in developing open research practices. Open research, as we know, contributes to transparency and therewith can provide one means of increasing the trust in science. And as STM publishers, we agree that a sustainable open research model where information is credible, accessible, linked, and searchable in perpetuity can support trust in science by making that research process more transparent. Publishers recognize the role they play in facilitating open science. For example, the introduction of journal-level dating sharing policies, particularly those that mandate rather than simply recommend an action, such as including a data availability statement, have a real influence over author behavior. And we can see in study after study an increase in research data sharing after data sharing policies have been introduced at the journal level. With the recent OSTP announcement, which includes a call for open research data, there's a lot of work that will be to be done to support authors with education, training, tools, and infrastructure, including the development of metadata to achieve what is envisioned. There's a lot of heavy lifting that we need to do, and I really believe that this is going to be best done if we can come together and collaborate around it. A fourth area that I'd like to talk about is standards and persistent identifiers. As we move towards open at scale, we want to achieve open and trusted at scale. And an important element in our ability to systematically disambiguate and validate authors, as well as connect research output so that we can achieve what we know we can achieve with open research, is persistent identifiers. Now, some publishers find it difficult to mandate ORCIDs. For example, on some journals or in some subject areas due to author pushback. And I truly have spoken with some authors that feel that they don't want to take those few minutes to create an ORCID ID for a number of reasons, and some of which I do understand. But what might we achieve if I, as CEO for STM, worked with my members and library associations worked on their end with their members to campaign together for the use of these persistent identifiers? Imagine if we worked together and created a comms program around ORCID IDs and creating ORCID IDs. Wow, what might we achieve if we did that? We could set an ambitious target and really demonstrate that collaboration can lead to real results. What might we accomplish together that we're struggling to achieve independently? And finally, the fifth area that I'd like to talk about, and again, this isn't exhaustive, I could have added so many more things, but I'd like to talk about research integrity. This is a topic that is high on the agenda of STM and its members. And in this area, I referenced this a little bit in the beginning of my talk, publishers have come together to build a cloud solution to equip the scholarly communication community with data, intelligence, and technology to protect research integrity. STM has an operational arm called STM Solutions. And STM Solutions is building the STM Integrity Hub. And this is going to be an infrastructure that will allow publishers of all sizes, big, small, we need everybody joining with us. It'll allow publishers to screen article for breaches of research integrity. So currently, for our first minimum viable product, we're working to launch it with the ability to detect paper mill papers, duplicate submissions, and image altercations. With respect to paper mills, STM partnered with COPE earlier, the Committee on Publishing Ethics, to investigate paper mills and to write a report, which has now been shared online. And I encourage you to read that if you have not already, because it really describes and lays out the real problem we are facing with paper mills. Our next step, COPE and STM, is to engage other stakeholders to join us in identifying strategies that we can collectively work on to stop paper mills and to stop behaviors before they make it as far as a submission. Because what we'd really like to see is that we don't need to screen papers to see if they're paper mill papers. If you'd like to join us in this work, please get in touch if you're a publisher or if you are a library or other entity that would like to work with us. A second area of research integrity where I also see that we have a common interest and we might work together is around peer review. The peer review process is and will continue to be key as the volume of information increases and concerns around misinformation grow. Numerous studies have demonstrated that researchers continue to value peer-reviewed content and see it as a trusted version. But we have some issues with peer review, let's be honest. Researchers with whom I've spoken with, for example, share with me that they receive far too many requests to peer review content. And some of those requests are coming from predatory journals, but they're also receiving more requests than they can accept from legitimate journals and publishers. And as researchers begin to adopt open research practices, that volume of content that needs to be reviewed is going to grow even more. Researchers will be publishing their research data, protocols, methods, and other micro publications that make the research more fair. There is a wide appreciation for the concept of peer review, but again, there's also wide recognition that it's not perfect. And we do risk it breaking as the burden upon researchers becomes unmanageable. And yes, there are calls for moving peer review to preprint servers and some really interesting experiments that are going on around that. But I'm not convinced that that in and of itself is going to solve these issues, because in essence, we're just moving the work that we're taking care of here and the issues that we're facing to another place in the system. So I'd argue that this is an area where publishers and libraries could come together and think about these new forms of content. What type of review do we need in order to feel comfortable about the validity of those outputs? Again, things like methods, papers, the research data, etc. You're in contact with the research community. You understand also what is a serious publication, and we might work together around this. I had a conversation with Lisa Hinchliff, a known figure here at Charleston, a couple of months ago, and we touched upon peer review. And we agreed that there could be opportunities for publishers and librarians to work together to rethink some of the checks that peer review covers and leverage librarians' knowledge of local research communities. And I'll leave it to Lisa to develop those ideas and put forward them in a talk. I don't want to steal her ideas because they were really good. But what I took from that conversation I had with her was that discussing the issues of peer review across professions gave rise to creative thinking about solutions. We need to bump together because we're seeing these things from different angles and from different perspectives. And by coming together, we can discover new solutions that we wouldn't have thought about on our own. The issues that must be addressed to build trust in science run much deeper than these 5 points. I know these are just scratching the surface. But as I said, we have to start somewhere. And I'm absolutely convinced that, like my conversation with Lisa, we will find better and more creative solutions that deliver real results when we come together and collaborate across professional domains. We owe it to the research community to do so. Indeed, we owe it to humanity to do so. So if any points on my list are of interest to you, or if you have other ideas about where we could collaborate, particularly as industry to industry, please reach out. I will be here in the middle, looking to bring ideas together. And I do hope that you'll meet me there. Thank you very much. And thank you again to the Charleston Conference and to Leah for joining me today to record this talk. I hope on another occasion I'll get to join you in person.